All right, welcome back to another episode of the RaaP. I'm pretty excited for today's discussion, mostly because I'm the pupil in this one. All right, I think I'm really here to learn quite a bit, but I'm here to learn on something that is incredibly topical, and so hopefully will be valuable to the listeners as well. We're talking AI security, right? And so those two words mashed together could mean a lot of things, right? Specifically, what we're talking about is as mid market enterprise organizations start to adopt AI, either in kind of a basic sense with hey, we're gonna give chat gpt licenses to our users, copilot licenses, et cetera, all the way to potentially we're going to actually start building some agentic type tools, and giving them potentially even privileges and access, an ability to work on our behalf. How are we thinking about the security of those? In my conversations that I've had with both IT leaders and security leaders lately, this is incredibly topical. It seems to be the primary thing they're wrestling with right now. Um, I know enough about the problem, but man, I don't know a lot about the solution. I think it's really an emerging area, and so I'm excited to learn from you, Kyle, on kind of what you've learned over the last year as you've done some of this, um, on your side. So should be a really good conversation. Where's the best place to kick it off? Where do you think we should start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one call out first, and you hit on it. It's an emerging space, and what that entails is that best practices are still forming, right? And what was a year ago is not necessarily true today, and what's true today is probably not going to be true in a year from now, right? And so I think that's one of the kind of exciting pieces of this space is that it is emerging. But what it's called into question is I think some of our previous beliefs or different security paradigms. And so one of the first ones is RBAC, right? So role-based access control. And that for a very long time and even still when we think about users is considered a best practice. You define a role, what those tasks are, what those permissions, for that role are, and then you assign that role to a user, right? So instead of individually crafting out permissions by user, you do it by role, and then you assign those, one or many roles to a particular user. And that's considered best practice. The challenge, right, with that in an AI perspective is that generally, even though we think about trying to do least privileges or trying to not over provision a user, we still provision these roles based off of the exceptions, right? The thing that you're going to do once a quarter, the thing that you're going to do once a year, and you think about managers or admins, you're typically not in there day to day leveraging the full extent of your permissions,
Mm.
even though you have those permissions inside the system, right? Like adding and deleting users, typically not something you're doing every day. Most of the time, a manager may be in there looking at reporting, right? So really just doing a read only in that moment, not doing a delete into the database. Or into the system. And so what happens is that now you've kind of if you assign the AI those permissions, and that was, I think, when originally it came onto the scene, people were looking at it as this digital helper, and it is assumed a user's or inherited a user's credentials, right? And they actually looked at that. That's how they kind of sold it. It was like, hey, we're not giving it admin rights. We're gonna, it'll scope down to your user. And that seems good when it's a search and summarize tool, right? When it's this digital helper to go in and say, like, hey, read a bunch of data inside of this system and then come back and give me an answer. That's probably okay, because whatever the user had access to read, maybe that's okay. But now as it becomes more agentic, right, like performing actions on behalf of, in a non-monitored way, that becomes very problematic, right? Because you've given it keys to a bunch of rooms and it acts very, very fast, right? And so, without naming names, but I think if everybody read the news, a company that had an agentic workflow and in 9 seconds deleted their entire production database, right? Like it was that quick, right? There was no, oh, let's escalate it, let's get on a call, let's have a meeting, let's do, it was 9 seconds and it's gone. And so like that's part of the challenge is that, if you take the role-based access controls, human permissions, the key insight is that they're typically overbroad for this use case.
Uh, but today, I mean, even today, like generally speaking, this is what's happening, right? I mean, these tools are largely following either they're getting a role provision to them that was based on a former kind of human way of thinking, or they are assigned the user role that they're assigned to, or like user access and whatnot that they're assigned to, right? I mean, this has, are there new tools that are emerging in this space? Like how are people thinking about solving for this sort of thing? Because it's like it definitely is a different paradigm, right? Like you almost need
Yeah.
agentic specific roles and controls on them. But
Yeah.
it feels like it's very much emerging.
It still is. And so, you're going to have, um, it's almost happening in two ends of the spectrum. You still have people that are adopting, the first wave of what were considered best practices around like, oh, we need to make sure that, we're not over, just giving it admin access. Let's make sure that it's role based access controls, or those types of things. And they're still kind of in that adoption period. And now we're telling them, hey, you actually got to come right back out of that into this next thing. And you do have, emerging tools, or some of the more, um, you know, I'd say, cutting edge, leading edge, softwares, that are thinking about it in a little bit different way. Um, and I want to hit, I guess, one other security thing that will frame up kind of like, okay, well, then what do we do about it? Like, what's going to be the solution? And it is around, companies really, we were kind of protected by the limitation of humans, right? Like even, you think about like bad actors. I mean, that's always been the thing. Like, oh, a bad actor is going to get in your system, and that's what you're mostly defending against. Um, but in reality, as damaging as those bad actors are, they are few and far between. Like most people in the world wake up and want to do the right thing. They do the right thing at work. They're not malicious and, thinking about throughout their day, how do they just, cause as much havoc inside of a system as I
Right.
can. And if you think about it, right, like what's kind of, a little bit terrifying, if you think about all the users inside of your company and what controls or access they have, if they all woke up one day and decided to create as much chaos inside of your systems as they could, it would create a lot of chaos in systems, right? Like as protected as these things are, um, if every user in your company woke up today and said, "I'm just going to create damage," like they will wreck shop, across these places. And so, um, now you take that capability to do that and take it to a non something that doesn't have intent, and it doesn't have a filter, and it doesn't have the human friction of, I still have to eat, I still have to sleep, I can only move and think so fast, where, computer doesn't have to do any of that type of stuff. And there's not that human friction of like, even if I'm, you know thinking about being malicious, I'm going to have some societal self-imposed restrictions, right? Like I don't want to go to jail. I, even if I'm going to try to do this, I'm going to try to do it in a, you know, hidden
Right.
way. A computer doesn't have any of those restrictions about intent, consequence. It's just a math problem that's being performed. And so what happens is that the blast radius is very significant, as we've just talked about, and the speed is also very significant. So like I think those two kind of frame up like, all right, so we got a big problem, right? Now,
Yeah,
what do
well,
we actually have?
even with a bad actor, even with a bad actor, you have triggers, right? Where you would see, okay, like, we've got something there. There's a lateral movement. There's an escalation of privileges. Like there's something like that, right?
Yep.
But you're not seeing those sort of kind of early signals, right?
No, no, because and yeah, that's exactly right. Like we have detection methods today that would flag things that are out of pattern, or weird escalations of permissions, or all those types of things that would help you catch and stop some of this. Um, this wouldn't, like those systems aren't designed around, a machine performing those tasks, right, or a machine having those permissions. And so, they're really just not suited to the task. And so, what I'm seeing take shape, and then, again, I don't know that there's any one product or one thing, and this is more just a framework that I'm seeing take shape in the market as people talk about it, is this idea of kind of bounded agency. And so, to put it simply, is instead of giving a permission for a role, you're really giving permission for a task at a specific time under a specific context. Now, that obviously, like that level of specificity, both in time and bounding, can create, that there's a challenge to that. Like every single time, like your permissions are being kind of altered or whatever. But I do think that is, kind of what is taking shape. And so you would have essentially, the task that's going to happen in this agentic world. You give some type of context, or there's some type of trigger that says that the agent is going to perform, and then that agent would look and say, okay, in order to perform this task, these are the types of permission sets that I think I need under, least privilege context. And then it would take that to, like a policy engine, a rule-based engine. And this is where you flip from, predictive AI type technology back to, prescriptive, right? Where it's not guessing at that point, right? Like there's an actual rules based engine with a if this then that, that says like, okay, under these conditions with this thing, does this thing get this set of permissions, yes or no? And so you don't have necessarily an agent giving another agent controls. You kind of flip between, and this is where, more broadly speaking, I think this is true, using, you can use AI everywhere, but not for everything. I think is a key distinction. And there are still places, and a lot of places, where the prescriptive, rule-based, kind of linear stuff is actually a better tool and a better process than using pure, AI that's kind of taking a roll of the dice, if you will.
What are the implications though from like an infrastructure perspective, right? I mean, everybody's wanting to move fast, everybody's wanting to do this, and the easy route is, oh well, like I'll work with Claude or OpenAI or whatever, right? And I will connect it and I'll give it privileges. They'll match my privileges because I'm aligning it to my Active Directory and my my user name, right? Everything you're describing to me sounds like, okay, well, there's another infrastructure layer there that has to be built and
Yeah.
potentially a lot of control around it, right? And so, what are kind of the implications either from time or kind of expertise that's needed to build this? Like, what sort of like how much more are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it is, right. I mean, it is and I would say it depends on, what you're trying to do with it, right? Again, like if you're just doing a search and summarize using, the user's credentials is probably okay, right? Like assuming that you have, that person, kind of walled off to whatever whatever data that they have access to in your system, whatever policies, HR and
Right. So
files
that works really well,
that
right? And
work.
it's most basic, right?
Yeah.
Match in a Microsoft environment, match the security groups,
Yeah,
right? For the
exactly,
user.
exactly. Right. Like if I can read it, my AI can read it, and therefore, it can search and summarize back to me. I think that's a fine way to look at it. Where you get into, I want this agent to perform actions on my behalf or on the organization's behalf. That's where you need more kind of a little bit more methodical approach to say, hey, we need to put in place, these rule based systems or these policy engines, that can help secure what is really typically around that MCP, layer, right? Um, and
All right.
that,
Well, educate me on that. I'm gonna pause you right there. I hear MCP thrown around all the time. I'm gonna prompt you like you're a AI. Explain MCP to me like I'm a fifth grader.
okay.
We were joking the other day. No, maybe a third grader.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Maybe a golden retriever.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not at the top of my class third grader, right? Like,
yeah, just a run of the mill one.
so yeah, so MCP, model context protocol. is really, so you have an LLM, so large language model, and that thing thinks in natural language, right? But machines still operate via these APIs, and so you need a way, you basically need a transaction or transition layer where you can take what is a natural prompt in human language and then create or access APIs, right? So I'm going to go get, your CRUDs, your create, reads, updates, and deletes. So all the things that it's going to go do, because in and of itself, right, if you have just a model sitting in a box, that model doesn't have the ability to do a lot of the things that you see a chat gpt, a claude, all the things that they go and they, like, oh, I'm going to go search the web. Well, the llm isn't actually going and searching the web per se. It's accessing some type of mcp server or some type of api that then goes and it creates or performs those actions, brings it back into a text format that then the llm can read and process, right? So it's this conversion layer between what an LLM understands and then the actions that happen via APIs. And so you think of APIs and tooling and all that kind of stuff, and then you inside this server, right? It's the connection layer between those two things. You would define what it has access to, and then the protocols to convert that language. Um,
It
right?
seems like that's where people are honing in on, though, as far as like where to secure this thing. It seems like that may be the place to throttle potentially,
Yes.
or have
Yeah, because
control.
that's the door to the, either, when you think about it, out or in, right? It's what is letting the LLM um, out of its box into other boxes, and to perform whatever actions or to get whatever data it's happening through that MCP layer. And so that's like the kind of choke point, if you will, around how you'd secure it, right? Because you've got LLM on one side and then whatever resources on the other. And so that's the piece. It's also, like we talked about, it's people are having struggles with it, right? I mean, you read the news. I mean, even some of the
Yeah.
most leading companies that are out there, um, there's a lot of concern around how secure are these MCP servers. They've got a lot of data that exists on them, or they're storing credentials, right? Like you end up having, this tool now has, this server now has access into all of your systems. So if I can get, I don't even necessarily need to do anything with the LLM. If I can just get access to that MCP server, then I've got, access into all your stuff. So it is a very critical point. And this is why I talk about, short-lived credentials. So not ever, not forever credentials. You don't have an API key that's just sitting out there for months. Like, it should be very short-lived. To a specific task in a specific system, and so, like, that's how you're trying to do this bounded agency where, even though it performed it once, that doesn't necessarily mean it can, perform it again, and those types of things. And so, it's an exciting space. It's also one that, like, I you hear one side, like, we need to move fast, and that's true. But you can move really, really fast into a brick wall, and that's
Yeah.
that's painful for everybody.
What do you kind of see the next 6 to 12 months holds in this space? What do you kind of what's in the tea leaves?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think on the security front, I think that pressure will cause um, people to get serious about making that a more public and standardized thing about how to do, how we're going to secure or build MCP servers, right? Like, I think you're getting, it's there, but it's, we're still moving really fast in one direction, and we haven't really necessarily caught up on the security side. Um, I think as you hear more and more stories about where it went wrong and how much it went wrong, that'll force the security element to catch up. Um, and so I think that's what I would say from a security perspective. I think it's got some catching up to do, because and because it's being demanded, right? Like,
Yeah.
companies, boardrooms, executives, they see it happening. They see people taking advantage of it. There's a strong belief in the ROI, and I think those things are all true. So it's going to demand security You can't just be like, well, we can't do it. Why we can't do it? You know,
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
won't that won't suffice as an answer anymore.
Yeah.
You got to figure
It's
it out.
interesting. I mean, I think that we had a we Adrian and I did a kind of a CISO roundtable sort of thing a little while back, and a lot of what they were talking about was even just visibility around the MCP servers they have in their environment, right? Like, I mean, I think the the nature of, like, one, you can just run connectors, right? Like, you can just do a connector as a marketing guy, right? And it's like, oh, well, I want to connect it to our CRM. Like, you can, right? And you may not get immediate visibility. Like, there may not be discovery tools that show that in like a SaaS to SaaS sort of communication or integration scenario, right? Like, that's not even an MCP server you're controlling. It's an MCP server that your provider is controlling.
Yep.
um, and so, like, I think a lot of what I was hearing from them is even just discovery around, like, hey, we need to see all of these that we have out there. All right, like, what do we actually have integrated? What are the permissions around these things? Like, how does that work? um, but obviously, after discovery, there's going to come some level of solutioning. I'm sure there's providers that are in the marketplace for this. Adrian was actually telling me yesterday, he's like, no, look, there's emerging solutions here.
Yep.
Obviously there's going to be, because there's going to be a ton of demand. So, but you got to start with that discovery. And I think, you know at least as of that was probably 2 months ago that we were having that conversation with a bunch of successful CISOs.
Yeah.
And a lot of what they were talking about was just discovery around it, right? It was like sprawl. That was the next iteration of sprawl. All right. And it's like, hey, how many of these are actually out there? What are we doing around them? What are our standards? What do we say yes to? What do we say no to? Like, very much still an emerging space. I'm sure there's going to be vendors who perform well in this. Um, so
Well, and
interesting.
one of the and a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important around the MCP specifically is that unlike before, right? Like API keys or APIs, very clear, like who owns what and how those things interact, right? The provider, the application is going to post, here's the endpoints that I expose, and here's the data that you get, and here's the parameters that I accept to then give you the data, and then you can basically create or manage an API key. But then ultimately, you as a customer are responsible for you know getting and basically taking that data and then doing whatever you're doing it on your side. The MCP server, because it's basically almost in a weird way, it's kind of abstracting that API layer away, where it's still using it, but the provider, right? And you see this in some of the CRMs, they're coming up with an MCP server. So like the provider can have an MCP into their system, and then you can configure it almost like an application inside of their app. And then you have third parties, right? So for SaaS applications that haven't caught up, or maybe this was early on, you'd have these third party companies that would stand up an MCP server, and then you'd almost create this bridge where I'm going to plug into this MCP server. That MCP server has a plugin into whatever application I'm using, and that has implications about, like, okay, well, now I've got data going through, to and through, and credentials being stored in this other party, and then you as an individual or as a company can create an MCP server to connect, right? So like it's a little bit more wild west of like where is this thing going to actually live, who's going to be responsible for creating it, maintaining it, and productizing it so that it is secure, right? Because um, a leading edge CRM company or market leader CRM, when they announce an MCP server, there's probably a little bit more assurance that it has the natural controls out of the box versus some startup random third party that you can use to hop, skip, and a jump. So I think those are all another kind of considerations where the MCP itself, depending on where it lives, how do you secure it in different ways?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, this has been helpful. I mean, look, this is a kind of conversation we're sharing externally here, but something that we're talking about often internally right now. Between me and you, or you and Adrian, or me and Adrian, or these types of conversations are rolling around. So, really good one. I appreciate the information.
Cool.
All right. Well, that's a wrap.
It's a wrap.